Book 1, Canto 11. The Legend of the Knight of Red Cross. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Morgan Scorpion. The Faerie Queene by Edmund Spenser. Book 1. The Legend of the Knight of Red Cross. Canto 11. The knight with that old dragon fights 2 days incessantly. The third him overthrows, and gains most glorious victory. High time now gan it wex for Une fair to think of those her captive parents dear, and their forwasted kingdom to repair. Whereto, whenas they now approached near, with hearty words her knight she gan to cheer, and in her modest manner thus bespake: Dear knight, as dear as ever knight was dear, that all these sorrows suffer for my sake, high heaven behold the tedious toil ye for me take. Now are we come unto my native soil, and to the place where all our perils dwell. Here haunts that fiend, and does his daily spoil. Therefore henceforth be at your keeping well, and ever ready for your foeman fell. The spark of noble courage now awake, and strive your excellent self to excel, that shall ye evermore renowmed make, above all knights on earth that battle undertake. And pointing forth, lo yonder is, said she, the brazen tower in which my parents dear for dread of that huge fiend imprisoned be, whom I from far see on the walls appear, whose sight my feeble soul doth greatly cheer. And on the top of all I do espy the watchman waiting tidings glad to hear, that my parents might I happily unto you bring, to ease you of your misery. With that they heard a roaring hideous sound, that all the air with terror filled wide, and seemed unnethe to shake the steadfast ground. Eftsoons that dreadful dragon they espide, where stretched he lay upon the sunny side of a great hill, himself like a great hill. But all so soon, as he from far descried those glistering arms that heaven with light did fill, he roused himself full blithe, and hastened them until. Then bad the knight his lady yeed aloof, and to an hill herself withdraw aside, from whence she might behold that battels proof, and eke be safe from danger far descried. She him obeyed, and turned a little wide. Now, O thou sacred Muse, most learned dame, fair imp of Phoebus and his aged bride, the nurse of time and everlasting fame, that warlike hands ennoblest with immortal name. O gently come into my feeble breast, come gently, but not with that mighty rage wherewith the martial troops thou dost infest, and hearts of great heroes dost enrage, that nought their kindled courage may assuage. Soon as thy dreadful trump begins to sound, the God of War with his fierce equipage thou dost awake. Sleep never he so sound, and scared nations dost with horror stern astound. Fair goddess, lay that furious fit aside, till I of wars and bloody Mars do sing, and Britain fields with Saracen blood bedyed, twixt that great Faerie Queene and Paynim king, that with their horror heaven and earth did ring. A work of labour long, and endless praise, but now a while let down that haughty string, and to my tunes thy second tenor raise, that I this man of God his godly arms may blaze. By this the dreadful beast drew nigh to hand, half flying and half footing in his haste, that with his largeness measured much land, and made wide shadow under his huge waist, as mountain doth the valley overcast. Approaching nigh, he reared high afore his body monstrous, horrible, and vast, which to increase his wondrous greatness more, was swoln with wrath, and poison, and with bloody gore. And over all with brazen scales was armed, like plated coat of steel, so couched near, that nought mote pierce, ne might his course be harmed with dint of sword, nor push of pointed spear. Which as an eagle, seeing prey appear, his airy plumes doth rouse, full rudely dight, so shaked he, that horror was to hear, for as the clashing of an armour bright, such noise his roused scales did send unto the night. His flaggy wings, when forth he did display, were like 2 sails, in which the hollow wind is gathered full, and worketh speedy way, and eke the penners, that did his pinions bind, were like mainyards, with flying canvas lined, with which whenas him list the air to beat, and there by force unwonted passage find. The clouds before him fled for terror great, and all the heavens stood still, amazed with his threat. His huge long tail, wound up in 100 folds, does overspread his long brass scaly back, whose wreathed borts whenever he unfolds, and thick entangled knots adown does slack. Bespotted with all shields of red and black, it sweepeth all the land behind him far, and of 3 furlongs does but little lack, and at the point 2 stings infixed are, both deadly sharp, that sharpest steel exceeden far. But stings and sharpest steel did far exceed the sharpness of his cruel rending claws. Dead was it sure as death indeed, whatever thing does touch his ravenous paws, or what within his reach he ever draws. But his most hideous head my tongue to tell does tremble, for his deep devouring jaws wide gaped like the grisly mouth of hell, through which into his dark abyss all raving fell. And that more wondrous was, in either jaw 3 ranks of iron teeth enranged were, in which yet trickling blood and gobbets raw of late devoured bodies did appear. That sight thereof bred cold congealed fear, which to increase, and as at once to kill, a cloud of smothering smoke and sulphur sear out of his stinking gorge forth steamed still, that all the air about with smoke and stench did fill. His blazing eyes, like 2 bright shining shields, did burn with wrath, and sparkled living fire, as 2 broad beacons set in open fields send forth their flame as far off to every shire, and warning give, that enemies conspire, with fire and sword the region to invade. So flamed his eyne with rage and rancorous ire, but far within, as in a hollow glade, those glaring lamps were set, that made a dreadful shade. So dreadfully he towards him did pass, for lifting up aloft his speckled breast, and off bounding on the bruised grass, as of great joyance of his newcome guest, eftsoons he gan advance his haughty crest, as shoferd boar his bristles doth uprear, and shook his scales to battle ready drest, that made the red-cross knight nigh quake for fear, as bidding bold defiance to his foeman near. The knight gan fairly couch his steady spear, and fiercely ran at him with rigorous might. The pointed steel arriving rudely there, his harder hide would neither pierce nor bite, but glancing forth passed forward right, yet sore amoved with so puissant push, the wrathful beast about him turned light, and him so rudely passing by, did brush with his long tail, that horse and man to ground did rush. Both horse and man up lightly rose again, and fresh encounter towards him addrest, but the idle stroke yet back recoiled in vain, and found no place in his deadly point to rest. Exceeding rage inflamed the furious beast, to be avenged of so great despite, for never felt his imperceivable breast so wondrous force from hand of living wight, yet had he proved the power of many a puissant knight. Then with his waving wings displayed wide, himself up high he lifted from the ground, and with strong flight did forcibly divide the yielding air, which nigh too feeble found her flitting parts, and element unsound, to bear so great a weight. He cutting way with his broad sails, about him soared round, at last low stooping with unwieldy sway, snatched up both horse and man, to bear them quite away. Long he them bore above the subject plain, so far as Eugan bow a shaft may send, till struggling strong did him at last constrain, to let them down before his flight's end, as haggard hawk presuming to contend with hardy fowl, above his able might, his weary pounces all in vain doth spend, to truss the prey too heavy for his flight, which coming down to ground, does free itself by fight. He so disseised of his griping gross, the knight his thrillant spear again assayed, in his brass-plated body to emboss, and 3 men's strength unto the stroke he laid, wherewith the stiff became quaked, as afraid, and glancing from his scaly neck did glide close under his left wing, then broad displayed. The piercing steel there wrought a wound full wide, that with the uncouth smart the monster loudly cried. He cried, as raging seas are wont to roar, when wintry storm his wrathful neck does threat. The rolling billows beat the ragged shore, as they the earth would shoulder from her seat, and greedy gulf does gape, as he would eat his neighbour element in his revenge. Then gin the blustring brethren boldly threat, to move the world from off his steadfast henge, and boisterous battle make, each other to avenge. The steely head stuck fast still in his flesh, till with his cruel claws he snatched the wood, and quite asunder broke. Forth flowed fresh a gushing river of black gory blood, that drowned all the land whereon he stood. The stream thereof would drive a water-mill. Trebly augmented was his furious mood, with bitter sense of his deep-rooted ill. The flames of fire he threw forth from his large nose-thrill. His hideous tail then hurled he about, and therewith all enwrapt the nimble thighs of his froth-foamy steed, whose courage stout, striving to loose the knot that fast him ties, himself in straighter bands too rash implies, that to the ground he is perforce constrained to throw his rider, who can quickly rise from off the earth, with dirty blood distained, for that reproachful fall right foully he disdained. And fiercely took his trenchant blade in hand, with which he stroke so furious and so fell, that nothing seemed the puissance could withstand. Upon his crest the hardened iron fell, but his more hardened crest was armed so well, that deeper dint therein it would not make. Yet so extremely did the buff him quell, that from thenceforth he shunned the like to take, but when he saw them come, he did them still forsake. The knight was wrath to see his stroke beguiled, and smote again with more outrageous might. But back again the sparkling steel recoiled, and left not any mark where it did light, as if in adamant rock it had been pight. The beast impatient of his smarting wound, and of so fierce and forcible despite, thought with his wings to stye above the ground, but his late wounded wing unserviceable found. Then full of grief and anguish vehement, he loudly brayed, that like was never heard, and from his wide devouring oven sent a flake of fire, that flashing in his beard, him all amazed, and almost made afeard. The scorching flame sore swinged all his face, and through his armour all his body seared, that he could not endure so cruel case, but thought his arms to leave, and helmet to unlace. Not that great champion of the antique world, whom famous poets verse so much doth vaunt, and hath for 12 huge labours high extolled, so many furies and sharp fits did haunt, when him the poisoned garment did enchaunt with Centaur's blood, and bloody verses charmed, as did this knight $12,000 daunt, whom fiery steel now burnt, that erst him armed, that erst him goodly armed, now most of all him harmed. Faint, weary, sore, emboiled, grieved, brent with heat, toil, wounds, arms, smart, and inward fire, that never man such mischiefs did torment, death better were, death did he oft desire, but death will never come when needs require. Whom so dismayed when that his foe beheld, he cast to suffer him no more respire, but gan his sturdy stern about to weld, and him so strongly stroke, that to the ground him felled. It fortuned, as fair it then befell, behind his back unweeting where he stood, of ancient time there was a springing well, from which fast trickled forth a silver flood, full of great virtues, and for medicine good, while home, before that cursed dragon got that happy land, and all with innocent blood defiled those sacred waves, it rightly hot the well of life, nor yet his virtues had forgot. For unto life the dead it could restore, and guilt of sinful crimes clean wash away. Those that with sickness were infected sore, it could recure, and aged long decay renew, as one were born that very day. Both Silo this and Jordan did excell, and the English Bath, and eke the German Spau, nor can Cephis nor Hebrus match this well, into the same night back overthrowen fell. Now gan the golden Phoebus for to steep his fiery face in billows of the west, and his faint steeds watered in ocean deep, whilst from their diurnal labours they did rest, when that infernal monster, having kest his weary throe into that living well, can high advance his broad discoloured breast above his wonted pitch, with countenance fell, And clapt his iron wings, as victor he did dwell. Which when this penfive Lady faw from farre, Great woe and forrow did her foule affay, As weening that the fad end of the warre, And gan to higheft God entyrely pray, That feared chance from her to turne away. With folded hands and knees full lowly bent, All night fhe watcht, ne once adowne would lay Her dainty limbs in her fad dreariment, But praying ftill did wake, and waking did lament. The morrow next gan early to appeare, That Titan rofe to run his daily race. But early ere the morrow next gan reare, Out of the fea faire Titans dewy face Uprofe the gentle Virgin from her place, And looked all about, if fhe might fpy Her loved Knight to move his manly pace. For fhe had great doubt of his fafety, Since late fhe faw him fall before his enemy. At laft fhe ware he upftarted brave Out of the well, wherein he drenched lay, As eagle frefh out of the ocean wave, Where he hath left his plumes all hoary gray, And deckt himfelfe with feathers youthly gay. Like Aias hawke up mountaines unto the fkies, His newly budded pinions to affay, And marvels at himfelfe, ftill as he flies. So new this newborne Knight to battell new did rife. Whom when the damned fiend fo frefh did spy, No wonder if he wondred at the fight, And doubted, whether his late enemy it were, Or other new fupplyed Knight. He now to prove his late renewed might, High brandifhing his bright dew burning blade, Upon his crefted fkull fo fore did fmite, That to the fkull a yawning wound it made, The deadly dint his dulled fences all difmayd. I wote not, whether the revenging fteele Were hardned with that holy water dew, Wherein he fell, or sharper edge did feele, Or his baptized hands now greater grew, Or other fecret vertue did enfue. Else never could the force of flefhly arme Nor molten metall in his blood embrue, For till that ftone could never wight him harme, By fubtilty, nor flight, nor might, nor mighty charme. The cruel wound enraged him fo fore, That loud he yelded for exceeding paine, As 100 ramping lions feem'd to roare, Whom ravenous hunger did thereto conftraine. Then gan he tofle aloft his ftretched traine, And therewith fcourge the buxom aire fo fore, That to his force to yielden it was faine, Nor ought his fturdy ftrokes might ftand afore, That high trees overthrew, and rocks in pieces tore. The fame advancing high above his head, With fharp intending fting fo rude him fmote, That to the earth him drove, as stricken dead, Ne living wight would have him life behote. The mortall fting his angry needle fhot Quite through his fhield, and in his fhoulder feaft, Where faft it ftuck, nor would thereout be got. The griefe thereof him wondrous fore difeased, Ne might his rankling paine with patience be appeased. But yet more mindfull of his honour deare, Then of the grievous fmart, which him did wring, From lothed foyle he gan him lightly reare, And ftrove to loose the foule infixed fting, Which when in vaine he tryde with ftruggling, Inflam'd with wrath, his raging blade he heft, And ftrooke fo ftrongly, that the knotty fting Of his huge taile he quite asunder cleft. 5 joints thereof he hewed, and but the ftump him left. Heart cannot think, what outrage and what cries, With foule enfoldred fmoke and flashing fire, The hell bred beaft threw forth unto the fkies, That all was covered with darknefle dire. Then fraught with rancour and engorged ire, He caft at once him to revenge for all, And gathering up himfelfe out of the mire, With his uneven wings did fiercely fall Upon his funbright fhield, and gript it faft withall. Much was the man encombred with his hold, In feare to loose his weapon in his paw, Ne wift yet how his talents to unfold. Ne harder was from Cerberus' greedy jaw To pluck a bone, than from his cruel claw To reave by ftrength the griped gage away. Thrice he aflayd it from his foot to draw, And thrice in vaine to draw it did affay. It booted nought to think, to rob him of his pray. Though when he faw no powre might prevaile, His trufty fword he called to his laft aide, Wherewith he fiercely did his foe affaile, And double blowes about him ftoutly layd, That glauncing fire out of the iron playd, As fparks from the anvil ufed to fly, When heavy hammers on the wedge are fwayd. Therewith at laft he forced him to untie One of his grafping feet, him to defend thereby. The other foot, faft fixed on his fhield, when as no strength nor strokes mote him constrain to loose, ne yet the warlike pledge to yield. He smote thereat with all his might and main, that nought so wondrous puissance might sustain. Upon the joint the lucky steel did light, and made such way, that hewed it quite in twain. The poore yet missed not his minish'd might, but hung still on the shield, as it at first was pight. For griefe thereof, and divellish despight, from his infernal furnace forth he threw huge flames, that dimmed all the heavens light, and rolled in duskish smoke and brimstone blue, as burning Aetna from his boiling stew doth belch out flames, and rocks in pieces broke, and flagged ribs of mountains molten new, enwrapt in coal-black clouds and filthy smoke, that all the land with stench, and heaven with horror choke. The heat whereof, and harmful pestilence, so sore him noyd, that forced him to retire a little backwards for his best defence, to save his body from the scorching fire, which he from hellish entrails did expire. It chanced eternal God that chance did guide, as he recoyled backwards in the mire, his nigh forewearied feeble feet did slide, and down he fell, with dread of shame sore terrified. There grew a goodly tree him fair beside, loaden with fruit and apples rosy red, as they in pure vermilion had been dyed, whereof great virtues over all were read. For happy life to all, which thereon fed, and life eke everlasting did befall. Great God it planted in that blessed stead, with his almighty hand, and did it call the tree of life, the crime of our first fathers' fall. In all the world like was not to be found, save in that soyle, where all good things did grow, and freely sprung out of the fruitful ground, as incorrupted nature did them sow, till that dread dragon did all overthrow. Another like fair tree eke grew thereby, whereof whoso did eat, eftsoons did know both good and ill. O mournful memory! That tree through one man's fault hath doen us all to die. From that first tree forth flowed, as from a well, a trickling stream of balm, most sovereign and dainty deare, which on the ground still fell, and overflowed all the fertile plain, as it had dewed been with timely rain. Life and long health that gracious ointment gave, and deadly wounds could heal, and reare again the senseless course appointed for the grave. And to that same he fell, which did from death him save. Full nigh thereto the ever damned beast durst not approach, for he was deadly made, and all that life preserved did detest. Yet he it oft adventured to invade, by this the drooping daylight gan to fade, and yield his room to sad succeeding night, who with her sable mantle gan to shade the face of earth, and ways of living wight, and high her burning torch set up in heaven bright. When gentle Una saw the second fall of her deare knight, who weary of long fight, and faint through loss of blood, moved not at all, but lay as in a dream of deep delight, besmeared with precious balm, whose virtuous might did heal his wounds, and scorching heat allay, again she stricken was with sore affright, and for his safety gan devoutly pray, and watch the noyous night, and wait for joyous day. The joyous day gan early to appear, and fair Aurora from the dewy bed of aged Tithon gan herself to rear, with rosy cheeks, for shame as blushing red. Her golden locks for haste were loosely shed about her ears, when Una did her mark, climbed to her chariot, all with flowers spread, from heaven high to chase the cheerless dark, with merry note her loud salutes the morning lark. Then freshly up arose the doughty knight, all healed of his hurts and woundes wide, and did himself to battell ready dight, whose early foe awaiting him beside, to have devoured, so soon as day he spide. When now he saw himself so freshly reare, as if late fight had not him damnified, he woxe dismayd, and gan his fate to feare. Nathless with wonted rage he him advanced neare, and in his first encounter, gaping wide, he thought at once him to have swallowed quite, and rushed upon him with outrageous pride, who him rencountering fierce, as hawke in flight, perforce rebutted back. The weapon bright, taking advantage of his open jaw, ran through his mouth with so importune might, that deep empierced his darksome hollow maw, and back retired, his life blood forth with all did draw. So downe he fell, and forth his life did breathe, That vanifht into fmoke and cloudes fwift. So downe he fell, that th'earth him underneath did groane, As feeble fo great load to lift. So downe he fell, as an huge rocky clift, Whofe falfe foundation waves have wafht away, With dreadfull poyfe is from the maine land rift, And rolling downe, great Neptune doth difmay. So downe he fell, and like an heaped mountaine lay. The Knight himfelfe even trembled at his fall, So huge and horrible a maffe it feem'd. And his deare Ladie, that beheld it all, Durft not approch for dread, which fhe misdeem'd. But yet at laft, when as the direfull fiend She faw not ftirre, oft fhaking vaine affright, She nigher drew, and faw the joyous end. Then God fhe prais'd, and thankt her faithfull Knight, That had atchieved fo great a conqueft by his might. Canto XI. Book I. The Legend of the Knight of Red Cross.